I originally shared this elsewhere, but thought you would enjoy it here. If you've heard it before, well, I hope you enjoy it again. I'll give you the disclaimer now that names and some of the situations have been changed to protect identities, mostly my own. But the dollars and general nature of the situation is 100% true. A year out of school back in the early 90s, I got a job as a business analyst for a large family-owned tech company. This business was located in the booming heart of technology at the time and was pretty profitable. As tech took off over the next decade, the company thrived and remained family-owned. What was a rich family and company became exceedingly wealthy, with a valuation in the low 10 figures. The family that owned it was quite neurotic. They were all moody and had reputations as being very ruthless when it came to financing, deal-making, employees, and things of that nature. I truly believe that this is what held them back from ultimately becoming a household name as a company. As I progressed through the ranks, I gained more and more face time with the owners. I worked on some projects directly with ownership that really paid off and gained me even greater access to their inner circle. Now, like a lot of people at the time, and particularly those who worked in tech, I was heavily invested in tech stocks. I discussed some of my investments and gains with ownership as casual conversation, though investing had nothing to do with my role with the company. That is, until one day in late 1999, when the owner came to me and asked me if I would invest some of his personal money. He wanted me to take big risks to see if they would pay off using $1 million of his personal money. I was a bit hesitant, but still being in my late 20s and wanting to prove myself, I said I would. I asked for a written agreement where they acknowledged this wasn't my role in the company. It was a personal matter between the owner and me, and to document my compensation for this side arrangement, 20% of all profits. Around the same time, and by working in the industry, I started to notice the weaknesses associated with a lot of tech companies. They just weren't living up to their hype and stock price, and some seemed like they were starting to run out of money. I had no inside information, just this strong sense of which companies were struggling based on my work in the business. Based on this sense, I started using both my money and the owner's money to short tech companies just after the new year in 2000. For anyone unfamiliar with shorting, it means if the value of a stock decreases, the value of the investment increases. I had a few long positions, but my overall position was very short. Since the owner wanted big risk and big reward, I used his money and obtained leverage or margin from the financial institutions where I maintained both his and my trading accounts. The accounts were separate, but both under my name. Again, I documented this and gained consent. Well, both my account and his suffered some moderate losses in the first 2 months of 2000, before the bubble began to burst, and both accounts, but his in particular, began to skyrocket. In June of that year, the company began to suffer a downturn. We were still profitable, but since we provided tech services and products, we weren't exactly immune to weakness in the broader market. I hadn't informed the owner of my short strategy. He came to me one day and asked how his money was doing, saying he suspected it was way down like the general market. To his surprise, I informed him that while we still had some money tied up in options and shorts, that based on the positions I had closed, there was $1.35 million in cash sitting in the account that belonged to him. Again, I still had a bunch of positions open, which, if memory serves, were worth about $1 million on that date. But the positions I had closed had already yielded $1.35 million in cash just sitting in his account, which again was in my name. The owner, either through ignorance or lack of attention, said, "Great, 1.35? Fantastic work in this down market. Will you wire it to me when you get a chance?" I responded that I would, but would be taking my 20% of the $350,000 profit, or $70,000, before wiring him the remaining $280,000. I also reminded him I still had open positions that had yet to pay off or close, but I didn't state the amount. He, once again, appeared not to understand or comprehend the open position statement, but instead totally focused on and became incensed about my rightful claim for $70,000. He went on and on about how times were tough. I should be grateful for a job. particularly at my young age, and the entire $350,000 was necessary for both him and the company. I knew this wasn't true based on my position within the company. Worse though, this was my first time personally experiencing the greedy and corrupt nature that served as the basis for ownership's reputation. Now comes the revenge part, since after 2 separate conversations, the owner didn't seem to grasp that the open positions would yield at least some income and thus additional profit. I decided not to mention it again. I sent him back the entire $1.35 million and continued to manage the open positions to the best of my ability. And here's the kicker. The owner never brought it up again. He seemed to think that the $1.35 million payout was the entire value of the account and never understood or remembered that open positions still existed. He never asked for records, tax documents, or any time of audit or financials. Given the fact that he was dishonest with me, I didn't feel the need to disabuse him of that notion. Ultimately, after a bit more net gain, I covered all of the shorts and exercised all of the options, puts in this case, for an additional $1.8 million. I worked for the company for 3 more years, and the owner never asked about it during my tenure, after I gave notice, or since that point. I know it's a bit crass and even shady AF, but given his dishonesty with me over $70,000, I felt justified in keeping the additional $1.8 mil. I paid taxes on the gain and went on my way with a fantastic nest egg. Nobody has asked about it since, and I've only told the story to a few people, and even then, only after the statute of limitations had passed. The final ironic cherry on top of this sundae is that during my remaining 3 years, I gained greater influence with ownership and position within the company because they considered me loyal for giving the $1.35 million back and not making too much of a stink about the $70,000 profit. Little did they know, I 100% got the better of them. The company eventually folded due to family disputes, but my understanding is that ownership walked away in very good financial position. They likely could have been a much better and greater company had they not practiced the same dishonesty that they showed me with their vendors, clients, and other employees. I know that what I walked away with might just be a drop in the well to an incredibly wealthy family. But I didn't walk away with just pennies. And I sleep amazingly at night knowing that, at least in this situation, their greed wasn't rewarded. Eight years ago, I entered a relationship with someone who was almost too good to be true. He listened to everything I had to say. We had so much in common. I felt finally understood and really seen by someone as who I really am. I opened up to him more than I intended to, way too soon. Now, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. I know now that what he did to me back then is called love bombing. Some examples of his techniques: the second month of dating, he took me to an uninhabited island with his small boat, set up a gorgeous lunch he prepared at home, served limoncello. We went diving and he found a giant shell and gave it to me as a token of his love. Shortly thereafter, he took me to his childhood home, showed me pictures of his parents who were deceased, and gave me his old toy he claimed was his fondest childhood memory. I was sure that he was the one. But soon things started to change. At first, it was the little things. He'd make a cynical comment here and there about the way I looked or something I said, and that made me feel pretty insecure. He'd flirt with other women in front of me to make me jealous. I'd cry and he'd apologize and temporarily revert to his old romantic loving self. But his outbursts became worse and worse, and the amount of pleading with him and convincing him of my love was growing tiresome more and more each time. I felt exhausted and drained by the constant need to prove my love for him, just to earn a little bit of affection that he initially showed. I once got out of the shower and caught him browsing an online dating site. He said he made sure I saw what he was checking out to see if I'd get jealous and controlling again, but I didn't believe him. He was actually pretty bad with computers, and early on in the relationship, he once called me on the phone and asked me for my help with setting up an online account for playing chess. I tried to guide him through the process of setting up a username and password on this particular site, which was somewhat more complicated than these things usually are, and he grew impatient and just told me the username and password he wanted to use. I'd remembered that and tried this username and password on the dating site he visited. I immediately got into his profile, and what I saw broke me. Not only was he chatting up other women, but it was clear from some of the conversations that he had met other women and had sex with them. Some of the conversations contained intimate information about me and what he was dissatisfied with. What I read hurt so much that I cried on the floor like a baby. By this point, I knew he wasn't perfect and that our relationship was far from that as well. But I was clinging to that initial phase of our relationship, which made me feel the happiest I had ever been in my life. Now I got to deal with the fact that it was all fake. I cried for hours, and then something inside of me snapped. And that's when I decided to get even. I set up a fake online dating profile, the first of the many to come. I started chatting with him, and after a few days, he suggested meeting up. I feigned hesitation. He insisted. I reluctantly agreed to meet him in a large coffee house. I went there, half disguised, and sat where I knew that he wouldn't see me. I think part of me hoped that he wouldn't show up, and that this was all just a bad dream. I called him 10 minutes before the meeting with the mystery woman to ask where he was and if we could meet up. He said that he was busy and he couldn't. My heart just sank. I kept my eyes glued to the door, and sure enough, there he was. He came in, sat and waited. At first, I thought I was having a panic attack because I was so distraught, but I managed to calm myself down. He first waited patiently, then started fidgeting and looking at every woman that came in. And then, as if by divine intervention, a woman came into the cafe who looked just as what I described myself online as. He immediately approached her and said something. She dismissed him, but he was persistent, at which point she got pretty agitated with him and told him to leave her alone. He waited for another half an hour before leaving. That afternoon, I sent him a message through the dating site that I was indeed the woman that he spoke to, that I saw him, found him physically unattractive, but lacked the courage to discuss it in public, so I faked not knowing who he was. I apologized profusely, and he said that it was okay. No hard feelings. But I knew that for him, it wasn't okay. He was very self-aware and narcissistic. No way he would be unbothered by that. So I did it to him again, and again, and again. Sometimes he'd be stood up. Sometimes the woman would reschedule, and then he'd be stood up. Sometimes she'd cancel at the last minute. I think in total, at least 10 dates went south. I decided it was enough and that it was time to break up. I did it in public. I told him it was over because he was a cheating SOB. He denied everything and tried to gaslight me, spin the story as me being the jealous freak. I then looked at him and said, "Oh, all those failed dates? All me." And then I just let that sink in. He asked how. I just told him his username and password. Then I left. A few months after the breakup, he wrote me this lengthy email saying that what I did to him was ingenious, that it proved I was the love of his life, and that he completely lost the will for online dating because he both fears and hopes that every new woman he talks to is me. I never answered this or any other attempt that he made to contact me, and he still makes those attempts even now, all these years later. When I was 14, I went to stay with my aunt and uncle for a while. My parents weren't really in the picture, and depending on who you asked, they either couldn't be there for me or simply chose not to be. But that's for another story. So a lot of my upbringing fell on my relatives. My aunt and uncle took me in for stretches of time, and it wasn't unusual for my aunt to lean on me to help out around the house. One afternoon, she asked me to watch my 4-month-old cousin while she ran errands. I remember feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. I knew I was still a kid myself, but in her eyes, I was old enough to babysit, and maybe I wanted to prove that I could handle it. He was this tiny, fragile thing, and I held him while sitting on the couch with a couple of my friends over. Well, not long after my aunt left, the baby started crying, and he just wouldn't stop. I tried all the things a clueless 14-year-old could think of. I rocked him a little, tried holding him differently, patted his back, but nothing seemed to work. And this crying wasn't just fussing. It was that ear-piercing, constant wail that makes you panic after a while. The longer that it went on, the more overwhelmed I felt. My friends were there, but they were just kids too, and they were watching me struggle. I felt embarrassed, like I was failing at something simple. I was overstimulated and desperate to quiet him down. And in this weird, irrational moment, I pressed him against my chest harder than I think I should have. Not like I was trying to hurt him, but in some strange teenage logic, I thought maybe the closeness or the firm pressure would make him feel safe or comforted. He didn't stop crying right then. He just kept wailing, although after a while, he did eventually calm down. For a brief stretch of time, he was even playful, and I told myself, okay, maybe that's just how babies are. When my aunt came back hours later, everything in the house was calm, and she started feeding him bananas. I remember that part clearly because this was supposed to be his first time trying solid foods. Later that evening, she breastfed him and laid him down for the night. There were a couple of hours of silence in the house, and then he woke up. This time, crying much harder than I'd ever heard a baby cry before. It was nonstop, and if I heard that cry today, I think it would make my stomach turn. My aunt and uncle did everything they could to calm the baby down, but after a while, panic seemed to set in, and that's when they rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, he didn't even make it there. They told me that their baby had died before a doctor could even see him. I don't think I fully processed it at the time. I was 14, scared and confused. I knew adults around me were grieving, angry, talking about a lot of different things, and I just kind of folded into myself, did whatever I could to blend in and not make any waves. About a year later, my aunt and uncle had another baby, this time a daughter. She was about 6 months old when one day, my aunt looked at me and asked why my uncle never wanted to leave that child alone with me. Then she asked almost casually, "What did you do to our son that day?" And that's a question that's lived rent-free in my head ever since. At the time, I didn't know what to say. I told myself that my aunt was lashing out, or maybe she was repeating something my uncle had been saying behind my back. I didn't really let myself dig too deeply into it. But as the years have gone by, that thought wouldn't leave me alone. I'm 25 now, and for the last 5 years especially, it's been gnawing at me. I replay that day constantly in my mind. I keep wondering if, when I pressed him against my chest, if I broke a rib or caused some kind of internal injury. Could that have led to him crying inconsolably later that night? Could I have caused bleeding or damage that no one noticed until it was too late? The other side of me wonders if maybe he was already sick. Babies cry for all sorts of reasons. What if what happened had nothing to do with me at all? But it's the not knowing that's so unbearable. Living with my aunt and uncle after that only got harder. My uncle especially seemed to resent me, though he never came right out and said it. It was in his looks, how he spoke so condescendingly to me, and this constant sense that I wasn't wanted there anymore. By the time I was 16, I had to move in with my grandparents because the situation became unbearable. My aunt and uncle were never cruel to me, but they made it clear that I was now a burden. Since then, I haven't had much contact with my aunt or uncle. I haven't seen or spoken to them in over a decade now, and maybe that's for the best. But it also means I'll never have answers. I'll never know if they got an official cause of death from the hospital, and that's what caused them to blame me outright, or if they've just quietly carried the suspicion. Sometimes I wonder if I've been punishing myself unnecessarily, clinging to guilt over something that wasn't my fault. But other times, I can't shake the possibility that I really did play a role in his death, even if it was far from intentional. That uncertainty has shaped a lot of who I am now. I hesitate to get close to children or take on responsibilities for them. I avoid conversations about parenting, and this combination of guilt and shame that I've carried with me into adulthood is starting to get really heavy. I think about that baby often, even though he would have been almost 11 years old now. Sometimes I imagine what he would have been like if he had lived. And then I picture the moment where I pressed him against my chest, and I start to spiral all over again. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe that's far from the case. I'll never know, and it's that haunts me the most. This is a letter to my son. You came home this weekend, visiting from college. Your father and I texted asking if we could get you anything special from the store, and you'd replied, chicken and a biscuit, crackers, and peaches. I bought a few more things because that's just what moms do. There were yogurts in the fridge, along with milk, Crispix, your favorite cereal, some fruit roll-ups that I forgot to tell you about, and the chocolate pie that I made. We had friends over for board games Saturday night. They hadn't met you yet. I happily told them about how you were doing in school, and your pride in your luxurious and lengthy locks, about how you told me your hair was softer than mine. I had made peanut butter fingers for dessert, and told them how I'd send the rest of them back to college with you. I thought you were out visiting your friends, but then you got up from a nap, came in the room to say hi, and meet our friends for the first time. We smiled and introduced you. I'm glad they got to meet you. You didn't stay for dinner, though. You had been snowed in last weekend when you came down to visit, and had a lot of friends that you wanted to hang out with this weekend. I said something, I don't remember, whether it was see ya or have fun. I almost told you to text if you'd be out late, but you're 18, so I was trying to treat you like a grown-up. You took the car out. I'm not gonna lie, I know that you struggled the first quarter in college. You failed your first math midterm, since your high school teachers had left you woefully unprepared. Your math professor had a policy, though, where you could get the grade in the class of either your midterms or of your final. You decided to learn everything you should have in high school, then started relearning everything in the book from the start. You pulled off a great grade. I was so proud of you. You bragged about being a motherfucking prodigy in your CS class. Although you were too old to be a prodigy at 18, I let that slide. But I was so much more proud of what you accomplished in math than of how you did in CS. I know you struggled with some other things too. Things you opened up about. Some addictions, anxiety, depression. After your friend took his life last summer, you got your first tattoo. It was a semicolon with a heart at the top of it, for mental health awareness. You got it huge. Most semicolon tattoos are tiny little things, but yours was a good 3 inches or more. You took my advice and had it done by a professional, rather than your friend with a tattoo gun. Even though you had to wait a few more weeks to get it, you still got it before you left for school. After your friend passed, we made appointments with a counselor. You told me you liked her and that she was helping. She hadn't been taking new clients, but she made an exception for you. At first, I drove you to the appointments and waited in the room outside. Then you started driving yourself to them. When it was time for classes, you started seeing someone else at school, and they gave you the medicine that you needed. And we had our first bipolar diagnosis. I warned you that it can take a while and multiple tries to find the right medication, although I don't know if that ever really sunk in. I gave you advice a lot, and I worried a lot. I told you that it was my prerogative as a mom to do both. You were planning on moving out from the dorms, and I had started searching for some crock-pot recipes to help you feed yourself. We had always talked about having me give you cooking lessons, but hadn't yet found the time. You told me about the duplex you would rent, but you never sent me the link, although your aunt and I started filling it with imaginary furniture anyway. You'd need a bed, a dresser, a couch. Maybe. We didn't know if it would be furnished or not. You knew I worried, and once you joked that I always expected the worst things to happen. About defensive driving because of other drivers on the road. About providing your own protection, and not just trusting a condom that a young woman might have on hand. I didn't worry about guns. You had promised me you would tell me if you ever felt like ending it. You told me how mad you were when your friend left this earth. How mad you were that he acted like everything was fine. How he said he was just grabbing his headphones from the car, but instead drove off. You won't get to read this note. It's Monday. I saw you last on Saturday, going to your friend's house. According to your bestie, you had a great time. You told her your usual goodbye of te amo and left to come back home. She said you even drove parallel to each other before taking your usual turn off. But instead of coming home, you went to the beach. A beach that I had never been to before 2 a.m. Sunday morning. A few hours before that, you'd sent your friend what could only be considered a side note. This freaked her out so badly that she called the police and had her sister drive to our house. You wouldn't answer your phone, but your friend had the Find My Friend app with your location on it. She told your sister to drive us to the beach. When we got there, we weren't allowed to leave the car. It was cold out that night, but that wasn't why I was shivering. Your friend was in the front seat crying alongside her sister, but your dad and I were just holding hands in the back seat. I knew it was bad when the officer asked for the back window to be rolled down. It was to talk to us first. I couldn't even find the button to do it. Someone else had to roll it down for me. I just want you to know that I miss you so much. I still have the leftover peanut butter fingers and that chocolate pie we never got to crack into. Those are only two of the many things around the house telling me about how I'll never see you again. There will be more. I had ordered some stress reliever toys from eBay. I didn't know if they'd make it in time for your care package this month, or if they'd have to go out next quarter. I remember running out of time for the first quarter, and I used a pre-assembled Amazon snack pack as your care package then. And I just wanted to do a better job this time, even though your best friend told me that you had liked it. I didn't sleep yesterday. I took a Benadryl last night and woke up this morning feeling nearly human, until I remembered. I've already started on the Kleenex this morning. There will be more family visiting today. They keep asking if they can do anything, but there are no words that I have, no tasks that I need done. I just don't know what to do. I can't take back any of my previous actions or my previous words. I can try and help your father know that he was a good dad, the best. You won't get my future words. I never told you I was considering writing you a manual for how to live life. A little presumptuous, I know. I never had it all figured out either. But here's a letter. I love you. I tried to tell you every time I dropped you off, even in college. I love you, kid, and I always will.